You're listening to the Talent Therapy Podcast. Here, you'll find discussions around recruiting trends and best practices with talent acquisition leaders in the biotechnology and pharmaceutical industries so that you and your team are informed and up to date in an ever-evolving space. And now, here's your host, Chris Tamburini.
All right, Mr. Conor Sullivan, welcome to the Talent Therapy Podcast. How are you this morning?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to be here, Chris, and really appreciate you having me. I'm excited to share some of my experiences here.
Of course, I'm excited to have you as well. So I want to start off this conversation with the way that I start most of these conversations. And I think I would personally love to hear, and I think the audience would love to hear about your experience getting into recruiting and talent acquisition and what that trip has looked like for you so far.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And I think I'm going to start off probably in a place where you hear a lot of folks in similar positions to me start off, is that, recruiting was a completely foreign thing to me. I didn't know it was a career. I didn't even know it really existed, through my time in college or in grad school. When I entered college, I had the goal of being a scientist and kind of came through to being chemistry as my major, specifically organic chemistry. And as I was in my undergrad, I got involved in some academic research. So in a lab at Boston College, James Morkin's lab, actually. That was my first exposure to what it's like to be in front of a bench, what it's like to do research science. And that was really interesting. And kind of gave me enough of a background to send out some applications for grad school and PhD programs. And that's really where I saw myself going. I didn't know exactly what an industry position in chemistry would eventually look like, but I was interested in the difficulty of chemistry, in organic chemistry. And, also as I got further along, I really enjoyed teaching organic chemistry as a teaching assistant during my time at grad school. And as I got further and further into my research, what I found personally is that it was very isolating. You're responsible for driving your experiments, for creating your hypotheses, for testing those things. And what I was working on was a very niche rhodium catalyzed 4+2 cycloadditions, which very few people have ever heard of. And it would be to optimize one piece in a very large total synthesis. And I struggled to find the connection there. My motivation wasn't there. So at that point, I decided to master out of that PhD program, working with my advisor at the time. And that turned out, in the long view of things, to be the right choice for me. The takeaway was that I'm not the type of individual who's going to be able to sit behind a bench pipetting and or putting together reaction vessels for chemistry, and kind of the rigor and detail needed to go into that. You need to have a true motivation, I think, to become that level of a scientist. And I recognized I didn't really have that. And I was more motivated by helping individuals, by connecting with people, or at least I thought I was, having not, had any experience in that space. So I figured, hey, you know what I'll do? I'll go out and I'm going to try and look and land myself an analytical chemistry job. A lot of my work in grad school was focused on gas chromatography, liquid chromatography, mass spectrometry, NMR, really all the things we validate to validate, hey, did we make what we wanted to make here? That proved to be incredibly difficult. Now being in the biotech space, it's hard to get a first job right out of school, in any field, but especially as chemistry, as I was graduating, there were less opportunities there, especially in like the startup area. Things had moved further away from small molecule and into more protein and biochemistry. And then, now with molecular biology, CRISPR, cell-based techniques. And so I was networking, doing my best, applying to all these types of positions, and connected with a recruiter from a company called Lab Pros, and really just laid out to them what I just laid out to you. And the recruiter there said, hey, I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but we have an internal opening here. It would be a combination of recruiting for positions that we have, but also going out and bringing in new clients. So running a full desk, as it were, identifying new opportunities for us to recruit for positions in companies, executing on those opportunities and other opportunities that Lab Pros through previous relationships that already established. I thought about it and I was like, this is great. This is the sales area. I was thinking of like longer term, maybe getting into more capital equipment, technical sales, leveraging that technical background. And I thought here, this is great. I'll have the opportunity to understand the biotech space. A lot of sales and prospecting is researching companies, understanding what they're trying to do, and making that valuable business proposition and articulating how you can help them. And that's what it ended up being. It was the type of role where it was, there was some training, but it was a small group. We were a group of 4, and it really was, here's a computer internet connection and phone, shadow some folks on some recruiting calls, some sales calls, and then you're off running. That was I would say the biggest learning and partially the most difficult part of my career was this beginning part. As you well know, Chris, taking a relationship from zero all the way to a great placement as a recruiter takes a lot of time and effort. And when you've never done it before, it can be really challenging to figure out how to do that and to position yourself in an appropriate way so that you're not thinking of yourself, but you're thinking about how you can best help that company with that position. And from there, I got an opportunity to move to Winter Wyman. And at that point, what I had recognized in myself is if I wanted to do recruiting, I really needed to improve my ability to sell. And what I found at Winter Wyman was a great manager, someone who's really committed and motivated by leveling people up and helping them improve their skills, understand themselves a little bit better in what they're trying to do. And that's what really drew me to Winter Wyman, was that development opportunity. And so that was very different. It was not in biotech. It was in accounting and finance in New York City. So very competitive. I was taking the Amtrak down to New York every other week, developing those relationships from zero is very exciting. And it was just focused in the sales area. So I was still able to, we had recruiters who would support the positions that account managers would bring in. I'd still be able to talk to candidates prior to sending them to any clients, but I wasn't doing the volume of recruiting and the volume of those type of conversations. And that at that point, I actually was contacted by someone I was networking with back when I graduated with my master's. This person had a similar background to me in that they were in the sciences, and then they transitioned into capital equipment sales, which was something I saw. My dad is a physicist, which drew my interest in science, and he had always had these relationships or knew of people who had taken a route like that. And that was attractive to me because I could lean back into my technical background, but still have that social interaction, maybe more of a competitive type of position. And so that company was Danny Instruments. They're gas chromatography and liquid chromatography manufacturer, as well as detectors for those pieces of equipment. Also very small. They were trying to break into the pharmaceutical market in North America, which is a challenge as a very small company in the chromatography space, which is owned by Agilent, PerkinElmer, Thermo Fisher, these very, very large established great companies. And through that, what I learned is the importance of, your value proposition within the market, and how are you going to take away market share from a company that is very entrenched in, say, pharmaceuticals, especially in something as, I would say, old technology, quote unquote, as gas chromatography. And the thing that was unique about Danny is we had a unique detector, and that detector was we thought was going to have some impact in the pharmaceutical and biotech space. And as it turned out, it was very finicky, very hard to be consistent, also not very easy to operate. And so what this role taught me, from a marketing perspective, is the importance of being able to understand the need within the market you're trying to sell, not trying to force something, but being thoughtful about where your product fits, if at all, and spending a lot of time and effort in that area, getting that product into that space. I would say the other thing that was great about that time at Danny is my responsibility was all of North America. So it was traveling, across the country to different conferences. At those conferences, they would range from a couple hundred people to, thousands of people. That gave me the opportunity to stand up and give our product pitch in front of rooms of hundreds of people, which is incredibly intimidating,
Yep.
especially, Flash, that's, almost 10 years ago now. But what that showed me too is really focusing on how you're communicating the things that are important, and also kind of getting out of your own way, getting away from those nerves, and that independence of having to do that early in my career, I think really gave me a lot of confidence to move back into recruiting, which eventually I did. I moved on from Danny to a company called Forte Bio, which was acquired by Paul and then acquired by Danaher, all within the span of my first 6 months there. It was a really cool instrument, biolayer interferometry, very focused in small R&D type companies. That's where I always liked recruiting when I first started in recruiting. And in that, I found it to be large company, and sales in that is very transactional. And what I learned in that, and what I mean by that is, you're finding the prospect, you're setting up that relationship. But it was great. We had a whole team of field application scientists that could come in and give technical presentations or demonstrations to the scientists that we're trying to sell to. At Danny, I was actually doing a lot of that, creating white papers, training individuals on the instrument. And what I recognized is that it wasn't necessarily about the sale or the commission that comes from that sale, which is also great. It was that relationship and making people successful within the products and things that we're trying to develop. And so very quickly, 6 months, I decided that's enough. I don't want to do that. I need to figure out what I'm going to do. Taking that time and really being thoughtful about what was my motivation, and coming to that connection of it's really helping people, building teams. And I thought the best way that I could do that was taking my sales and recruiting skills, trying to find myself in a corporate recruiting role. And so I did that, again, connected with someone I had networked in my Lab Pros days very early on, Eric Celedonio, who runs SciBio. And at that point, they were very focused on RPO recruiting, or recruitment process outsourcing. And so essentially, I got an opportunity there to act as an hourly recruiter at three main companies. The first two were Fog Pharma and LifeMine Therapeutics. Fog Pharma is a company developing cell-penetrating mini proteins. They've actually just entered clinical trials and really expanded over the last few years. But it was that and LifeMine. LifeMine is more of exploring the fungal genome to produce natural products that we can leverage as medicine. So I thought that was also very interesting. You think of things like statins and things like that Merck have developed way back in the day. Really using AI to understand how fungi are creating these very complex molecules and seeing if we can leverage those for drugs. Both of those were really interesting to me and a great first opportunity because I'm a chemist by training. A lot of these companies were small. The hiring processes were somewhat mapped out, but as a small company, you really do need a specific type of skill set. So understanding that skill set, understanding how it fits into the company, and understanding how that role impacts company goals, I think really got me excited. I was excited about the technology, which is a key for me in anything. But that's where I really started to have success. And I found a lot of confidence in being able to manage and develop deep relationships with hiring managers and teams, because you're recruiting not one, two, or three, but you could be building out their entire team. Um, and also it was great to have positive feedback about, the surface level, but still some understanding of chemistry and the biotech workflow that helped me make these connections and really get people excited about the company, because I was excited about the company and technology. Um, and from there, pandemic happened. I had my first daughter, and Fog outgrew me, I would say. Started to bring in a larger HR team, starting to cement in more processes and systems. And I was really still, I would say at that point, more of a hunter, not really on the corporate side, but more of a pure recruiter. Um, and then I got an opportunity from someone I worked with at Fog to come on at Dino Therapeutics as a consultant. Initially just part-time. That quickly became full-time, brought in to really focus on their R&D lab-based positions. But Dino Therapeutics is very much a machine learning company as well, leveraging machine learning to help understand where they should focus efforts in designing new AAV-based capsids for delivery in gene therapy. And that was very, very cool. We grew, I joined right around 25 or 30 people. And over my time there, we grew up to over 100. So a lot of that was initially sort of that recruiting, hunting mentality, working with hiring managers, trying to understand what they were looking for. But then it morphed into more of what you'd expect, I think, from a corporate role, ironing out our hiring process. How are we communicating about these roles across teams? How are we making sure that we're hiring for the right role in the right place? Where are overlapping skill sets? Thinking about things like internal mobility and making sure we're being conscious of candidates that we already have in place and keeping those individuals motivated and excited. And that was great. We reached over 100 mark, and I think as every biotech did, there was no reduction in force. There was no significant reorganization, but it was clear that we had the people in place. There wasn't a ton of hiring to be done, and I started to kind of look for that next opportunity, which led me to where I am now, Harbinger Health, which is in a slightly different space in the diagnostic space versus the R&D or platform type companies that I had worked in the past. But ultimately, the work being done is all based in molecular biology, machine learning, data science, and computational biology. So the market space that I had come from in Dino Therapeutics has really served me well so far in Harbinger. And then again, every company that I've had the opportunity to work with has been fantastic, and mostly because I've been allowed to understand their technology and get excited about it. And Harbinger is no different there. Multi-cancer early detection, I think the impact not only to patients and providers, but patients and providers, but also the overall healthcare system. If we can give more insight into cancer forming pre-stage one or stage one, we can create maybe new opportunities for new therapies to be developed down the road, or certainly different avenues for individuals to seek treatment earlier on and give more opportunities for success to overcome cancer. And so that's kind of my story now, doing a similar role at Harbinger, now where we closed our Series B at the end of last year, hired 51 people, so over doubled in size. And this year, the focus is the hiring pace is slightly lower. And so it's really been ironing out our hiring process, building in interview training, hiring manager training, so that everybody's aligned with that. And then also the communication tools, making sure we're thinking about concrete business justifications for all the roles that we're opening, so that our executive team can confidently say, yes, let's go out and find this person and close this opportunity because it's impactful for the business. And that's kind of my story to date.
Yeah, that's a great story. That's a really, really thorough, and there's a lot of things in there that I actually want to ask you about. So I didn't realize, well, first off, believe it or not, you and I have a ton of similarities when it comes to our trip, if you will, throughout our careers, in that I also started in the sciences, right? A science major, and I worked in a lab. And you mentioned that you felt being an organic chemist was isolating. I was working in a biochemistry lab. I also felt it very isolating. It was interesting work, but I didn't want to pursue it. I didn't go as far as you did. I didn't, pursue a PhD. I realized in my undergrad, and then I ended up in an agency because I had an aspiration for sales and an aspiration to work with people in relationships. And that seemed to be a really common theme that you mentioned throughout your progression, is how important relationships are to you and the impact that you can have on people versus being totally transactional. And that seems to be a really common theme throughout your entire progression. And I'll save my story because I've probably said it a couple times on this podcast, but everything you've said, I identified with. And also, there's another interesting fact, right, where you actually left recruiting and then you went back into recruiting. I also did the same
Yeah.
thing for a very short amount of time. I left it for a year and I came back to it. And the reason being is I realized I'd missed the relationship aspect of it. And that was really important to me from both a candidate and a client perspective, how you're able to kind of
Absolutely.
impact the progress of a company that's trying to develop some sort of drug or therapeutic that ultimately will help patients. So there's a lot there that I identified with. I mean, a lot of things you said are very parallel. So I totally respect and understand more than you probably know where you're coming from. And that's maybe
And
a
you know what?
conversation we can have offline. But
Oh yeah, no, but I think the point to that is I think, well, for me, it's where my empathy for candidates comes from, right? Like especially in the earlier stages, I had no idea what finding a job was as a chemist or anything, and that was kind of part of the attraction of recruiting, is like you can learn a lot about how people hire, how people think about hiring people. Um, and so whenever I'm talking to someone, I want to make sure that I'm giving them some sort of comfort to that. Like, hey, you may not know exactly what's going to happen, but I'm telling you, you're an interesting person. You're going to meet with the team. It's just, it is a conversation. Be
yeah,
yourself. Like, I really want people to be successful as they can be in any given situation. Because I feel like I could have used that, and when I had graduated. Um, and so I think that career, the career back and forth also gives me perspective of like, I learned a lot in capital equipment sales. I learned a lot in my time in agency, and all of that has made me, I would argue, more successful in the corporate quote unquote recruiting space, because I have that understanding of the relationships, how valuable a relationship is. If you're a new
yeah.
salesperson, you may have zero relationships in your field of business, and it takes a long time to establish even one. So I think that's where a lot of my thought process and how I think about things comes from.
As you're talking about that, there was another thing I wanted to ask you, which was, you mentioned how kind of difficult it was, or how much work and understanding went into actually recruiting a candidate from zero all the way through accepting a job offer, and the things that happened throughout that process. When you started in recruiting, how much of it did you feel was selling the candidate on the opportunity versus listening to the candidate in what they were looking for in an opportunity? I struggled with that probably my first year or two, trying to figure that out. But now it's so simple to me. But I'm kind of curious to hear it from you. You said how difficult that was. I would love to hear. I think the audience would love to hear, especially the ones who are maybe newer on the talent side of things, how you figure that out, and what type of revelations came through.
That's an awesome question, and I think that in it, if I'm being completely honest, both my time at Winter Wyman and Lab Pros, I wasn't listening. I was selling on everything,
Yeah.
right? It was, and that comes through in a conversation. And it's partly because that's what I understood at the time my role to be was, I need to get business to, hit my numbers. I need to, talk to X amount of people a day to kind of, keep the pipeline full. When the reality is, it is only about listening. It's about listening and guiding. On the client side, it's understanding if what they're looking for exists. And if it exists in 10 people, being confident to say that and not saying it's not possible, but saying it's going to take a lot longer. It's going to take a lot more to convince individuals like that. And trying to use your knowledge of the market to inform them. And then the decisions that they make are the decisions that they make. Similar on the candidate side, I want to be able to position the company. And that's why it's so important to me that I am excited by the companies I work for. Because when I tell someone about the company I'm recruiting for, that also comes through. And the more I can give scientific details and connect why someone's background will fit this role, it'll allow them to make a reasonable decision about whether the opportunity matches with what they're trying to accomplish. And then within that, also listening for what they're trying to accomplish and understanding whether the role satisfies some of those goals that they have or whether it doesn't. Because especially, in any hire, we want to do things efficiently and quickly, but more importantly than that, you want to have a lasting relationship that's beneficial to the company, the output of the work the individual is going to do, but also that opportunity the company is providing takes that candidate forward, moves that candidate forward in their experience and what they're looking to accomplish. And really, you can only do that by listening. If you're focused on selling, you're going to be hitting the main points and glossing over details. I've found that top selective people see that and they're less interested. You can take the time to tell them about it, listen to what's important to them, and make those connections where they are. That's what I think yields the best relationship building early on in a process and higher chances of acceptance towards the end.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it, man. I think what you learn in recruiting is, well, there's this old rule, like the 80-20 rule, right? In sales and in recruiting, as a recruiter, your job is to just spend 80% of your time listening. Same thing in sales. 80% of what you do is just listening to what the client or the candidate has to say, or the hiring manager or the candidate has to say. And the other 20% is, like you said, using facts and using knowledge to guide, facilitate, and influence. And when I say influence, I mean, I don't mean it in like a car salesman way. I mean it like you're using facts to just make sure that they have the full perspective so that they can make the final decision. Because at the end of the day, you as a recruiter or a salesperson are never going to make the decision. They're going to make the decision.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah,
all you can
absolutely.
do is just guide them to make that decision. And I also early in my career, I got really comfortable with people who decided to say no, whether it was on the sales end or um, on the candidate end, because then you realize, well, listen, that wasn't the right fit. And I'm never going to make a square peg fit in a round hole, or whatever that saying is. And
Mhm.
it just means that we have to keep looking and we have to keep uh, building different relationships, or maybe we have to go back to that relationship if it's a client for a better opportunity at a better time. Or maybe I learned something from that to make me a better business professional or a better recruiter. And so, yeah, and you actually find a lot of productivity when somebody says no. That's what I found. It's like a relief. It's okay. Well, now I know what the answer is. On to the next, and that decision has been made. There's been clarification there, and we can all move forward in a more productive direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was, part of I would say, incorrect mindset I had when I started, which was it's about the process, not the hiring process, but about the work you're putting in on the client side to identify what they're looking for. And then on the recruiting side to go out and articulate what they're looking for in a compelling way and identify people whose motivations match that. And what it isn't about is the close. The close happens if there's mutual interest. And if you do too much to try and influence that one way or the other, the outcomes can become more negative if you're not giving full pictures or not trying to hide or convince someone that this is the right opportunity for them. It's really about doing your best to show both sides what's available, and if there's mutual excitement there, then it'll happen.
Yeah, that's right. The close is funny. I think when you start in sales, you're starting recruiting, there's this big emphasis on like, well, can you close? And what you realize is if you're doing your job right, then you're actually closing throughout the entire process, and the quote unquote close actually becomes the easiest part if you've done everything leading up to that point to be transparent and give as much information as possible. Then the close happens
Yeah,
organically.
100%.
Going
Close
back,
happens in that cold email you send. That's when
yeah,
it starts.
yeah, it does. It's you're always, you're always closing along the way, and sometimes closing is looked at as like this aggressive Wolf of Wall Street tactic. That's not what it is. Closing is
No,
educating and listening and collecting information and looking at things from different angles and bringing those angles up throughout the entire process to make sure that when you do get to the end, well, there's an easy decision to be made. So
exactly. Exactly.
happy we talked about this. This hasn't really been a topic
Yeah.
that we've discussed ever, but I'm happy it came up because I do think, and I think a lot of recruiters who are good and tenured, they know this already, but it's just not something maybe we talk about a lot. And I think maybe people who are earlier in their career could benefit from it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I kind of always think about my development and how it's benefited me and what I've learned along the way. And, I think the skills that we're talking about, are hard to come by. Like, to be bluntly honest, it took me all the way through sci-bio, I would say, so that's like half of my career to kind of figure out these things and get comfortable with that idea. But the more you think about it and the more you take the pressure off yourself to close the deal or to reach that revenue point or to do this and focus on the things that you need to do to get there and doing those things the best you can, that stuff will come. And I always found it really hard to see that in the beginning of my career.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an evolution. It's a learning process, but once you learn it, it makes so much sense. So talking about your career, you've seen things from a couple different lenses. You've seen them from the agency side. You've seen them from the in-house side. You've actually left recruiting altogether, and you've seen that. So you've probably been recruited. So, when you look at hiring trends from when you started in the industry, um, in recruiting trends versus current state, this is a loaded question, but how do you feel things have shifted and evolved and changed since then? And I'm not talking about the market. Everyone knows about the market. We've had plenty of conversations about that. I'm
Sure.
talking about trends as far as processes and um, strategies, things of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I kind of think about this question in two directions. Like, there's the process piece of things, which I'll address kind of in the second half, and then the other side that I think about is the candidate skill sets. And I kind of view that lens as part of my job. I feel is to help scientists, engineers understand what they can do and how they can position themselves to make their backgrounds more attractive. Um, the biggest piece of that I would say is sort of the interdisciplinary combination of skill sets. And, I don't mean this to say, if you can, right, become an expert in machine learning and molecular biology, that would be, a value to a lot of small companies out there who are applying machine learning towards solving biological problems. But really, there's, the more and more we bring engineering, machine learning, data science, computational biology, bioinformatics together with scientists, the more those two different disciplines need to be able to connect with one another. And so, whether you're an engineer or machine learning person, uh, take some time to try and understand the science behind it. Typically, very talented engineers and people like that can gain a surface level understanding, and that can really help in understanding how to build tools for scientists to leverage in a way that's going to be productive. Conversely, on the lab based side of things, and you kind of can see this a lot of times in bioinformatics, computational biology, having a lab based scientist that has done some data processing or understands how the changes in their experiment may impact the output of data can really help those collaborations. And so I think it's that from an interdisciplinary skill set is something that I've seen candidates leverage to their advantage, and something that if you ever get the opportunity to work in those collaborative things and you're interested in biotech, that's something that I think sets people apart and enables that communication and collaboration, which is crucial, especially in very small companies, which is really where I spend most of my time. On the sort of flip side of things, like process and trends around there, I think this will be colored by my experience, which is really companies in Cambridge biotech area from say 25 to right around 100, 150, somewhere in there is really where I spend a lot of my time. Um, and I think in there, where I've started off is really going out and identifying talent that we need through recruiter, LinkedIn Recruiter, uh, researching academic papers, finding people with the expertise that are going to fill our gaps. But as you start to grow and you're hiring more, you have less time to devote to finding those people. And it becomes more and more important to have a hiring process that really engages candidates, keeps their experience very positive, so that you can extend your network and your brand recognition, kind of word on the street, is a positive one, so that people, top talent, are drawn to you. And I think this really goes into the employer branding piece, which I think sometimes is focused on what does your careers page look like? Like, do we have pictures of folks interacting in the lab? Like, what are our mission statements and what are our benefits? But I think, those things are marketing statements and those are important, but it's about what you're doing to make each experience the best that it can be, that I think really helps accelerate in early stages that employer brand. Not only are you showing, who you are through marketing, but you're demonstrating that in every action. The more you can show who you are to people, the more you will attract people who want to work with people, with the person you are.
Yeah.
And that's culture fit. And that's the importance, I think, of that relationship, and having a long lasting employer employee relationship, any relationship really.
Yeah.
But, that's where I think my focus has shifted. I feel I've gone out and still can go out and find the one person, the first position in the company. I've done that several times. And now it's about how can we position ourselves so that we don't necessarily have to spend the time to do that, but those types of individuals are more attracted to us because that's what we're focusing our content and communication around.
The shift towards, thank you for that, by the way, but the shift towards employer branding has been a topic on this podcast a few times, and you can see it, right? You can see it, and I think when it comes to branding, there's always going to be naturally some sort of skepticism, because people always look at advertising and branding as just that, right? They look at it as advertising and branding, and with that comes a natural level of skepticism. And I've actually had a gentleman on this show before, James Ellis, who does employer branding. I don't know if you know him. Do you know him?
The name sounds familiar. I don't think I've ever interacted with him though.
So he's got a really interesting take on it, which is why I had him on this this podcast, and we talked about, all right, there's two ways to do it. You can create a brand that you think that you want people to see, and then you can create a brand that is totally genuine, and it's a lot harder to create a brand that's totally genuine. And I do think if you do it right, then you are going to attract the right people. How involved have you been in that? It sounds like you've shifted, more from a tactical recruiting angle to more of kind of maybe a branding angle. I understand you're doing both, but I guess what's your take on that, and how to really get the reality of the company and their goals out into the market without it being overly salesy?
Yeah. To your point, you do need both, especially early on, right? I think about, the branding piece as proactive recruiting. It's always there. It's something you're messaging consistently. Whereas when you're smaller, maybe nobody knows about you. You have seed funding, you have a Series A. Lots of companies have Series A. So it's important to have that person, that recruiter, who's excited by the opportunity itself and can go find someone who probably actually has never heard of the company or the space potentially. And I think in that you can also starts to that hunting and identifying candidates and how those candidates end up succeeding in their role can really help form the brand that you're trying to communicate. So, it's not one or the other. It's definitely they feed each other. Um, and the biggest work that I would say I have done on the branding side is going back to that, focusing on the importance of the process and measuring the candidate experience within that process, and then building out the things like, what should we be articulating on our careers page? What should we be building out on our LinkedIn Life page, which we're doing right now, at Harbinger Health? Um, the other thing that I'm really excited about at Harbinger, we have a marketing team too. So I
Mhm.
get to partner with them on,
That's huge.
uh, as simple as them taking the jobs and sending them out in thoughtful posts from Harbinger Health that reaches audiences that I won't reach solely through my network. And then also, having individuals who are really talented at creating um, compelling messaging, but also the digital piece of that as well. The more artistic and creative piece that can take some time to put together. And so that's what I'm really excited to do. Is we're still um, a lot in finding some of these people, going out and doing that work to find them. But as we do that, and as we've grown so much, our culture and who we are is becoming more clear to articulate. And so I'm excited to have that more of a, those LinkedIn Life pages, those permanent sort of employer branding type things that highlight our values. And then people get to see what our values are on our website, and then they get to see them in action in our hiring process, right? Referencing them. We'll be looking for them in our evaluations. So it enables this, here's who we say we are in those branding and marketing pieces, and then confirming that when you interact with us through a thoughtful process that is very much focused on candidate experience and finding the best fit for the position that we're looking for at that time.
Yeah, it seems like after you've laid that foundation from a branding perspective, it's become so much easier to recruit, right? And it's like you're playing with you got some juice now as opposed to just going in there totally cold. Which again, that works too. Going in totally cold works. It makes things a little bit more challenging, especially as you get into higher level roles and more complex roles. Um, but if you've put the time in and you've put the effort in to build this transparent, real story and put some stuff out there in the market, even if only 10 to 15% of your incoming hires knew about that, it's still going to make your job that much easier. And then I can see as the company grows how that kind of snowballs. I mean, one of the companies you look at that did something like that, and maybe they did it in a way that doesn't totally align with or isn't exactly like the way a company like Harbinger will do it. But I think one of the first companies to do that and do it well was like a Bluebird Bio, right? They had this entire, everyone
Yeah.
kind of knew about what was going on there, their culture, and they got to a point where it became very easy to recruit people because everyone knew
Yeah.
about Bluebird, everyone knew about their culture, and really a thoughtful, I think, approach to recruiting.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to eventually design systems that, processes, systems, employer branding, all of that, I think goes into that, a new eager recruiter excited about an opportunity has all the information at their disposal to help go out and find that person, to be confident in telling them about the company, what we're doing, what the role is and its impact. And I think that comes through showing who you are, making sure everybody in the company has that understanding, that collaboration and communication across the organization. And then the transparency to not only give people internally that, but to articulate that externally. So what does our hiring process look like for candidates, and be detailed about that? Who are they going to be meeting with? What are they going to be discussing? Why are they going to be discussing that? Can really help set people up for success and allow their true person to show through, because they know and they anticipate who we are, and then they can see that happen, when they meet us.
Absolutely. Um, so last topic here, which is related to the topics we just discussed, is leveraging resources and partners, whether that's on the branding side, whether it's on the tactical recruiting side. Um, you and I spoke about this a little bit one of the first times we connected, but um, would love to hear your strategy and your thoughts when it comes to leveraging resources and partners and how to balance that with your internal operations, because everyone does it a little differently. And I think there's certain times in certain places that you might want to leverage or utilize certain partners and strategies, but I would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah. So a lot of it goes to what we had just talked about. Like, I think in any sort of, evaluating any partner, whether that be um, executive search, contingency recruiting, contract recruiting, RPO, it's about, me as the buyer, quote unquote, of that service. There's a responsibility for me to be able to articulate the need in such a way that that person can go out and execute it. Um, the reason I think that's important is that there sometimes can be a tendency to say, let's just get an agency on it, right? And if you haven't been thoughtful about, well, what are we looking for? Like, why is it that we're not able to find that? Is it because the person doesn't exist, or is it because we don't have the time, the bandwidth, and that skill set is very in demand or niche right now?
Mhm.
The latter is where I would choose to partner with a focused external recruiter who has expertise in that specific niche, because likely they're going to be talking to individuals, know those motivations that we've spoken about before, and if I can articulate why we're having trouble finding this, what we're looking for, why it's so important to the company, and those motivations align, then I'm helping my partner execute work that we need to have done. And really, it's about efficiency in that space. The more we can focus on the partnership, the more you can focus on the kickoff of a job, right? The
Mhm.
definition of that job, the quicker we'll be able to get to success. And speed isn't the only thing, but if I'm going out to agency, it's because we need the position as soon as possible. And so I think about leveraging specific focused partners and external search in those areas, and especially for positions that are higher level, that it's not going to be useful for me or the company to have a network and pipeline, right? If it's a position that we're only going to have one or two in the company, it's probably not worth. It's not going to be a good use of my time to go out and extensively canvass the area when that's already done and done by someone like yourself, Chris, in specific
Mhm.
areas. And that's where I think about leveraging external help. But again, I think it's really important for the person leveraging that, the company, to be able to set that individual up for success and enable them to empower their network to make a decision about whether the opportunity is of interest or not. Um, I've had a lot of success leveraging talent acquisition consultants in a RPO style or kind of ad hoc style, maybe even, as little as 10, 20 hours a week, all the way up to full time. When I do that, I think of it in a similar way. Like, I'm not going to bring in a recruiter where we don't have any process. The job isn't really well defined. Again, we want to set people up for success and define things in a way that the company gets the right person at the right place in the right time, but can also describe what that right person, that right place, and that right time is to the individual they're asking to go execute that work. Um, the RPO style has I think been more effective for me because a lot of times the companies I'm recruiting for are smaller, and there's a lot of benefit and value to having more time to build relationships with the hiring managers, the team, understand the company, and go out and find those, especially at say senior scientist and below type levels, and leveraging extending that outreach and those things for niche positions where maybe you're not getting the applicants or quality of applicants that you need. that'll also take into any sort of other consultant. You mentioned employer branding. It's important to be able to project manage that, so to speak, as a company, and listen on both sides to your partner. You're picking them because they're expert. So make sure you're taking into consideration their suggestions. And now that I'm saying all this, I think it goes back to that relationship piece, right? And
Mm-hmm.
establishing things from a thoughtful way and putting yourself in the other person's seat as much as you can, and thinking about what's going to help that person be successful in what we're trying to do together.
Awesome. That's great. That is it's a really nice way to kind of conclude things here. Unless there's anything else you want to talk about. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you that came up during our conversations, or anything else you want to touch on? Otherwise, I think we covered a lot of really good material here, including your background, which is a fascinating story.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. I hope there's some useful things here in the conversation we've had. I really enjoy the opportunity to talk through all these thoughts. I think the more chances you have to connect with professionals in TA and work through these different thoughts. There is no one right answer. Every individual, every company, every position is slightly different. And so I really value the opportunity just to, share what I've learned and kind of how I think about recruiting, and really appreciate you taking the time to set this up.
Awesome. Well, we'll have you back on at some point, but it was my pleasure, and I really appreciate it, Conor.
Yeah, I'd love to, Chris. And thanks again.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Talent Therapy Podcast with Chris Tamburini. This show is for entertainment purposes only and is copywritten by Rana and Vance, LLC.